All right, this is the second video about trait perspective. This is kind of the end of trait perspective. So this is just a reminder of where we're at as far as notes are concerned. You already wrote trait perspective, so you don't need to write that again. The last video we did talk about, in general, what traits are, and we talked about ways to assess traits. So that whole idea of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the Big Five, that was common with the last video. So how else do we assess trait perspective? So trait perspective is also interesting because you use your personality inventories from things like the MMPI. The MMPI is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. That one is interesting because, as you read in your book, it is mostly to help determine like psychological disorders. And so that one's kind of interesting because they have a lot of questions in there, some of them that are kind of weird. Some of them that the reason that they're weird is because they are trying to actually go and use what we call empirically derived questions. So the idea of the empirically derived question is these are going to be items that are selected to be included because they discriminate between the two groups. Meaning, if you took the MMPI, okay, they have had enough people take those questions before and answer those questions before that they know how someone who has a psychological disorder would respond versus somebody who doesn't, right? So that's the idea behind an empirically derived test, is we're basically trying to use these questions as kind of this divining rod where it's going to help us figure out, are you this group or are you this group? So trait perspective does that, and it's kind of helpful to be able to, kind of determine your traits, because one trait would answer this way, another trait would answer that way. Similar to when you did that Big Five assessment, you did that Big Five inventory. So I want to do a little test here. So what I would like you to do is pull up on Canvas. So if you're pulling up on Canvas, you're going to go under personality, and you're going to go under class handouts. Okay, so personality, class handouts, and you're going to click on this empirically derived test example. So empirically derived test example. You're going to click on it. And this is this is actually something that I found with my textbook. It's called the North Dakota Null Hypothesis Brain Inventory. I did not make this up. I know you think this is like totally something I made up. No, it's not. It is actually a real thing. It is an empirically derived test. So that means that the questions are, yes, they are going to be silly in this case, because they're looking for anything that could potentially discriminate between two groups. And in this case, we're trying to discriminate between people who have a higher GPA versus a lower GPA. So the first question I have in here is, what's your estimated cumulative GPA right now? So, fill that out on whatever your best is. And then you're going to go through, and there's a bunch of weird questions in here. You just answer true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, whatever you think. Actually, read them. Don't just put true, false, and then hit submit. In class, what we will do is that after I get the results, I'm actually going to pull this up, and we're going to look at the differences in how people responded. So I'm actually going to have sorted. So the reason I made it a Google survey is because it populates a spreadsheet, and I'm going to sort it according to GPA from highest to lowest. It's totally anonymous. We don't know who answered it. And we're going to look for commonalities as far as, did most people with high GPAs say true on one, and most people with low GPAs had said false on another. Okay, so we're looking for, again, like I said, it's an empirically derived test. We're looking for the questions that are going to be the divining rod, that is going to divide between low GPA versus high GPA. Now, okay, this is a little rigged because, you're all in an AP class. I generally don't have a whole lot of low GPAs in here, but we'll do it anyways. We'll see if we can find a trend. So do that for me if you have not already done so in class, and then we'll talk about it in class. And if you don't get to be there in class when we talk about it, you'll have to ask me how it turned out. Okay, so that's the whole empirically derived test. The GPA thing is what we're doing, we're trying to divide. Okay. All right, so how do we see trait perspective today? So if you remember, we've talked about, up until this point, we've talked about two other personality theories. We talked about psychoanalysis and we talked about humanistic perspective. And in both of those, we talked about how they approach personality. We also talked about how they assess personality. And then we talked about the problems. So this is the problem section of trait perspective. So trait perspective, there is this controversy on whether or not our personality is stable or different in situations. So it's this idea of this person-situation controversy. And so are we the same? Are our traits going to be the same no matter what scenario we're in? So it doesn't matter if you're at home or if you're at school, if you're hanging out with your friends, are your traits coming out and are they the same? So the controversy is that, you know, you probably know, but they're not always the same. You act differently, right? So this is kind of funny because I have this cartoon and says, I'm neither a good cop nor a bad cop, Jerome. Like yourself, I'm a complex anagram of positive and negative personality traits that emerge or not, depending on circumstances. So in that case, yes, he's probably addressing being a bad cop. He could be a good cop. So there is that, you know, or are they actually that stable? Personality traits are also positively correlated as we age. So these traits affect our health, our thinking, and our job choices. What does that mean? Positively correlated. So as I age, what happens to my traits? They become stronger. My traits are going to become stronger as I age, and which is why when you took that, the Big 5 personality or even the 16 personalities traits, one of those self-assessments, I did tell you that if you did it again, say in 5 years, you may not get the exact same results. However, as you get older, your traits are going to be a lot more stable. So there is that. So there is that consistency, and they do impact our health. Obviously, like if you're a positive person versus a negative person, we've talked about that before. It impacts your thinking and how you view things, and also it impacts your job choices. Because, you know, if you're not an extrovert, you're not going to pick a job that's going to have you being day-to-day involved with people, right? So there is this. Trait score correlations over 7 years. So children, over the course of 7 years, the correlation is very low versus 50 to 70-year-olds, very high correlations. They're definitely scoring basically the same. Okay. And behaviors depend on the situation, but average behavior is generally the same. So while your behavior may be different at a job interview versus with your friends, but average behavior is the same. Even on a job interview, they will probably, you know, recognize and pick up on, or they should pick up on, some of those general traits that you may have. So those are kind of some of the difficulties with trait perspective. All right, that's it for trait perspective. The next one, the last perspective, is social cognitive. All right, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions.